Hey, everybody, and welcome to Bible Study That Doesn't Suck. This is Pastor Megan in San Francisco at Grace Lutheran. We have worship every Sunday at 10:30 a.m., and all are welcome to join us. You can come in person or you can join our live stream, which is at gracesf.com. Pastor Amanda will probably be joining us shortly. She is in Portland, Oregon at Central Lutheran, and she'll tell you a little bit more about that probably when she gets here, or you can check out any of our other archives. The texts for this Sunday are coming up on Transfiguration. If you're not a big church geek, you may or may not know that Transfiguration is a time that Jesus goes up a high mountain. And, well, it's more of a hill. And while he's up there, the clouds come, and Elijah comes and Moses comes, and it establishes that Jesus is a really important dude, a part of the line of prophets, and a part of the way that the Messiah is supposed to come in the world is to have Elijah come first. And so it kind of checks that off the list. We'll talk about that more in depth. But first, we're going to check out the 2 Kings reading and do a little talking about that, because it's a text that will be read this Sunday in order to help you begin to believe that going on top of a mountain and having imaginary people appear in a whirlwind of cloud is possible. Oftentimes when the gospel writers are telling the stories, they're going to set you up to be like, oh yeah, that could happen. That could totally happen. One of the ways of doing that is to tell you the story of Elijah and Elisha. And the way that Elijah goes up into heaven in this swirling whirlwind. Maybe it's a tornado. Maybe it's like the cow in the tornado movie, Twister. Or maybe it's like a cloud elevator. Maybe it's very similar to the way that Jesus rises when Jesus goes up into the heavens after the life, death, resurrection story bit happens. We're not entirely sure. What it should remind us of is the story in Moses. And if you've seen any of the movie versions of when they're crossing through the Red Sea, you'll know that in front of them is a pillar of cloud, and behind them is a pillar of fire. The cloud is, something tangible that lets you go, oh yeah, God's totally here and with us and protecting us. The fire is to keep back the armies who were faster and stronger and mightier. Fire is used a lot of times to keep people at bay and to make sure that they don't come in and conquer you too quickly. And also because they were traveling through the water at night, and the fire was a bit of a nightlight, a lamp for them to be able to see. Reminds us of the burning bush. There's all these different Bible metaphors that are going through here. Today's reading, or Sunday's reading, the 2 Kings reading, the pastoral warning for anyone who is a lector is to remember that you have to really enunciate, or you have to kind of change the way that you say some of the words, because it's very hard to hear the difference between the two names Elijah and Elisha. And if you say them very quickly, Elijah and Elisha, Elijah and Elisha, get it? Very hard and very confusing, and people often don't know what the heck is going on. And so that's part of the story. And part of the story that if you're just hearing it orally through your ears, can be very, very confusing. So be sure to pay attention to the difference between Elijah and Elisha. It might not be pronounced Elisha, but sometimes it's easier to hear the difference when you're saying those two. This is a story that is providing you with a chain of command. If you think about, if you watch the movie Interview or learn about succession in North Korea or in places where there is one very certainly in charge person, they have to figure out a way to pass on leadership. And it wasn't through election, it was through this divine ordinance of God. And in this story, it's through the passing on of a mantle, or you can imagine if the passing on happened with Superman passing the cape on to the next group of folk. It would be that kind of story. The interesting thing that's happening during this time, if you think of geeky Christian history and all the people that were fighting, is that there were these really big bad armies who were all over the place, and they were primarily interested in the land. because of where the trade routes were and where the fresh water was. It's very similar to many of the reasons that we fight today. It's a lot of the same spaces, like the Golan Heights, where Syria and Israel bump heads over fresh water, and some of the Gaza Strip areas are some of the places where they were still kind of fighting. Moab, which we'll talk about today, is in Jordan, and a place where there's a lot of fighting. And so it's people fighting over fresh water. It's people fighting over trade routes. It's people who are fighting over ways that it is best to love and serve God and how to be a part of that. And one of the things that's happening during this time is that there is a word for God that's being used by the Moabites, which, if you've paid attention to any of our previous Bible studies, it doesn't suck. You'll notice in like the book of Isaiah and in some of the other texts that we've had previously, that there's been a lot of like, and God will love everyone despite anything they've ever done, except for the Moabites. That has been kind of tagged into what's going on. This is the time period in Chronicles and First Kings and Second Kings where the Moabites are kind of the decidery people. The conclusion after the fact is that they did a horrible job and that God was really mad about it. And the language that they had for God at the time, I'm going to hold it up in my little thing. It might be backwards because I don't know how to pronounce it. And if you've ever watched any of my stuff, you know I pronounce things horribly all the time. I'm going to guess, because it is a Hebrew word, that it would be like chemos or chemos. It meant God's really pissed off at you. It's like a vengeful God, a savage God. One of the definitions of the etymology on it is that it's a god of fish, a fishmonger god. I don't know where that part comes from, although a lot of the places around the Jordan that they're talking about during this time involve fish, so I could see how you'd want God to be on your side. But God is really angry. The Moabites at this time are kind of like the Samaritans of the world. So if you remember during Jesus's time when he's traveling around, it's the Samaritans that are the ones like, you can't talk to them. They've got it all backwards. And the Moabites had a different name for God. They believed that the center of God's world wasn't Israel. And they were down a little farther towards the Jordan, and were kind of up to that. That's it. In my travels to Israel, one of the things that I learned is that a lot of different religions believe that sacred things happened there. They might have a just teeny tiny little difference in the take on what religious thing happened there. And they might also think it happened on this hill instead of that hill. There is a argument going on which hill is the hill of Transfiguration, whether it's this hill or that hill. But it's about in the same area that we're talking about in today's text. And it's, yeah, I just think it's curious that we might think God is here or there, but we fight like to the death about it. And the Moabites probably made some bad decision-making politically, but we've decided that their understanding of God was horrible and ruined people forever because they made these wrong decisions. The Samaritans also didn't believe that Jerusalem was the center of God's world, and they believed that there were different mountains where sacred things happened, and that was the big argument that just made everybody frustrated and upset. Those arguments continue in the Holy Land. People are arguing which boundary is where, which sacred place belongs to which place, and as we get closer and closer to a ginormous anniversary of the Reformation, one of the things that I think all of these squabbles can teach us is that we have evolved in our language about what we call God, right? There's lots of words for God in the ancient Hebrew. We don't always notice them in the English because they aren't translated as subtly. One of my personal favorites is El Shaddai. It means the many-breasted God, the God who breastfeeds and nurtures and takes care of God's people. And there's a million examples. I'll put a link down here to some of the many different lists of names for God that appear through the Old Testament. It means that each each location probably had a different swing on the way they understood God, which is pretty typical. Like if you go to a Lutheran church in Minnesota, you might find a slightly different take on how God works in the world than if you went to Pastor Amanda's church in Oregon, or if you came to Grace in San Francisco, or if you went to Pastor Laura Gruen's congregation down in Texas. It doesn't mean that any of us are smarter than someone else. It doesn't mean God likes us better. And as Lutherans, we don't think the closer we get to understanding God, the more God likes us, right? We think that God likes us all and does the work of reconciling, and we don't have to do all the work to figure out every right and wrong answer that's happening in the world. Instead, we do the work to try to take care of people. And I just thought, as kind of the illustration for the ways that God has been viewed differently in different times in history and even throughout our Bible, that I would show you some of the crosses that I've collected on my trips around the world recently, to just show you how, even though we're one big faith, we have really different ways of talking about what's going on. Pastor Amanda just arrived. Pastor Amanda, we're talking about how the Moabites used this word for God, Cheomish, or something pronounced something like that, and it was a very vengeful God, and they were proved through their bad governance to have picked the wrong name for God in the wrong place where God lives, and to have wanted to bring people back to kind of different understandings about what God wants us to do and what God wants to be called and all of those things. So we're talking about these differences not as something that is like horrible that we should forget about or whitewash or just translate into God every single time we see these different words, but to see it as something beautiful that can teach us how to live with the differences we see in our faith, whether it's the difference between Minnesota Lutheranism and Texas Lutheranism and Pennsylvania Lutheranism and West Coast Lutheranism, or if it's, Catholic, Presbyterian, whatever, or even if it's evolving names for how we define our own personal identities that other people in churches might not be able to be excited about. So here's some of the crosses that just illustrate around the world some of the different ways that we talk about faith, right? Do you want to guess where any of these are from, Pastor Amanda? We can play a game.
I want to hear where they're from, because sometimes it gets pixelated on my end, and so I don't get to see it clearly.
Okay, so this is Mexico City, Our Lady of Guadalupe, right? It's not even Jesus on the cross, y'all. Mary and the many Marys that have been central to many of the Latin American and South American places are the ones who are the holiness, who are able to bear Jesus into the world from their amazingness. So Our Lady of Guadalupe, who came to the farmer, not to the priest. This is Nazareth, and the thing that is interesting about this one, I don't know if you can see it, it's very similar to some of things that we might call pagan. It's all of the different sacred rocks that could heal you, right, or make you feel better, and then these are the different sacred oils that you'd have to have in order for life to be awesome, and then there's like different crystals on the top, which is really hysterical. So it's like, are crystals and oils okay for healing? Yes or no? I mean, we disagree in different parts of the world. Nazareth, very into it, right? Here's another one from Mexico. I just think it's pretty, right? Very sexy, gender neutral, maybe, Jesus.
Very pretty. Very nice.
This one's San Antonio. Very pretty, right? Happy Jesus for your house. Art decorating. This is another Mary one with lots of pressed flowers in there, right? So whether or not you think that it's a bloody, bloody, bloody happening, this is Bethlehem, right? And it's funny because when you buy something like this, the nuns or the people who are selling it to you, they'll say, oh, this is the cross that only exists in this part of the world, and you have to have a copy of it because it's only here. And then they'll tell you what the different symbols mean, and they'll be like, the 4 crosses in between are either the 4 gospel writers or the 4 blah, blah, blah. Like they don't even know what they mean, but it's like a choose your own adventure. It's pretty fun. This is Turkey, and you can see that it is, you can tell it's heavily influenced by how maybe if you were in a mosque, you might design your cross. Just kind of fun. This one's an easy one. I bet Pastor Amanda knows this one.
I actually can hardly see it. Is it Chronic?
No, it's San Damiano cross. Italy, the cross that St. Francis loved.
Oh, nice.
I'll have to put a picture up that's less pixely in case it's not turning out very well.
It might turn out on your screen, but just not on my screen.
Jerusalem, right? Because we're the only ones who would ever do it this way. It looks a lot like that other one I just showed you.
But it's a plus sign looking one, though.
Yes, it's not
Doesn't
longer
have the long.
because only the one place does it longer.
Right.
And this one's my favorite. I have others too, but it would take all day if I showed you them all. But this one's one of my favorites. Because it's got life coming out of the cross. Instead of it being bloody, 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 it's got new life happening. So that's fun.
Some people have actually looked at things like this and also seen sort of cross imagery in things like this.
Oh, yeah.
For the tree of life. So if you're someone who doesn't want to have an obvious cross on your person, you can also find the cross in other ways, like we were playing with the new life comment there.
That's right. But and also remember that, like, no one's ever said, hey, Mexico City, you're not good Christians because you have females on your cross, right? And no one's ever said, hey, you've got this gender-neutral cross. You can't be a Christian anymore. Oh, blah, blah, blah. But we might do that amongst ourselves. Sometimes the closer we are as family, the more we get grumpy. Like her church here in San Francisco gets a lot of letters. But we haven't said, hey, entire community of South America, your matriarchy makes us mad. You can't be a part of the Christian church anymore. In fact, to the contrary. We've been hoping to reach out to people in the fullness of what they believe. And sometimes our racism about people in other countries makes us believe that they couldn't ever possibly be smart enough to be as progressive as us. And so we better not make decisions that will make them mad because they couldn't possibly be progressive like us. That comes from racism. And isn't always true. When you see amazing examples, for example, when you see what Desmond Tutu was up to and the ways that they're able to forgive, you really think that the entire continent of Africa is not able to be progressive, yet they are able to forgive in ways that I'm not? Right? They're able to forgive huge genocide atrocities, and I can't even completely forgive my alcoholic father, right? Not on the same playing ground in any way, shape, or form. I have a hard time forgiving the person who doesn't go fast enough at the green light. I'm just saying, we're not the keeper. There are some parts of our lives where maybe we're progressive, and maybe we've got new and bold ideas, but every single person we ever meet on the planet is going to know something we don't know. And that's something we need to remember as we think about this upcoming anniversary of the Reformation, as we think about what it means to be church, and what it means to not always dig in our heels and say, well, it's very important to be traditional and do the thing the way we've always done it, because we've never done the thing the way we always done it.
Yep.
Just think of the number of different ideas about God that you can find throughout the Old Testament and throughout the New Testament. The fact they even needed to call it a New Testament right there kind of makes the point. So if you thought the 2 Kings reading was just a try to get through it and try to pronounce it good enough that people can understand what you're talking about text, there's something I think that's maybe hopeful in there. And maybe there's a cloud elevator that goes to heaven and we don't know where it's at yet.
Still looking.
Still looking. So that's 2 Kings. And Pastor Amanda, do you want to add anything on 2 Kings, or do you want to be grateful that you missed 2 Kings?
I want to be grateful because I'm just coming back from vacation and I'm running in circles and yeah, I will just be grateful. Thanks.
Yep.
Hi everybody. I know it doesn't seem like I was gone to them, but I was.
Do you have any tricks for how to enunciate the difference between Elijah and Elisha? Just do that and enunciate.
Elijah versus Elisha.
I know. Yeah. I say Elisha because it sounds different.
It
Even though
sounds
it might
different.
not be right, but it sounds
Right.
different enough, you can hear it.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think you really have to have someone who has really strong pronunciation to get the j versus the sh sound to make a lot of sense for folks. I think that's it's just hard.
It's a skip it reading. Is that what you just said?
I did not say it's a skip it reading. I'm sure we will be reading it on Sunday. I just
Don't know
don't
yet.
know because I just walked into the office 10 minutes ago.
Goodness gracious. All
But I
right,
got my email cleared.
pronounce it whatever way you want, or
Just
just
do
tell
it with
people,
confidence.
or tell
Do it.
people to read along with you as you're reading it because it's confusing.
I think the big tip for anyone who actually does any reading in church on Sundays is when it comes to those weird words and those things that are different, like Elijah and Elisha and all those kinds of things, is just read with confidence because no one actually really knows the right way to do things. And if you just do it with confidence, then the people in the congregation will trust you and will relax and feel like you are their leader and you are confident and it's okay. And the message isn't necessarily in the exact detail of how we pronounce the word. We get the message from other things because all of this is translation anyway. We're not pronouncing any of it correctly because we're not speaking in the language in which it was originally written. So just do it with confidence and non-apology and make your decision about how you're going to pronounce it before you get up there on a Sunday morning and just pronounce it that way and you'll be good to go and people won't even notice. They
And
won't even notice.
the other thing is to remember that the oldest writings that we have did not record the vowels.
Right.
So if you pronounce it Alicia or Elisha or Elisha, we don't know because the vowels were not recorded. And if you want to step out on a vowel in order to make it hearable, I say go for it.
And if people get upset with you and come and correct you afterwards, just say, wow, I'm so excited that you're going to read next time.
Or Pastor Megan told me to. That works sometimes. Psalm 50 is really mean. And again, it involves this God that's vengeful and vindictive, and you may or may not like this God. You can skip to a different psalm if you want to. In the text below, I've included the 5 verses that they're going to read on Sunday, but then I also included in italics all the other verses that are also in Psalm 50. Here's what I think of Psalm 50. I can't throw it because I think there might be more on the back.
What's the part on Psalm? I mean, keeping in mind, is it a lament? What is it? What kind of psalm is it?
It's God's going to be so angry and vanquish everyone with fire.
So it's probably coming from a lament place. I mean, and that's the thing with laments.
I crumpled it up. I can't tell. Hold on.
It's okay. I have pulled it up on my phone so I can take a look at it, but I haven't looked at the entire thing. I'm just assuming that it's probably a lament, which means that either by the end of it or in the next psalm, we're going to get to...
In the next psalm, but not in this one.
In the next psalm, we'll get to, you are God, and I trust you. I really am excited you're going to kill everybody I hate, but you're God, and you're going to do what you want, and you love everybody. Damn it.
Calls to the heavens above and the earth that he might judge his people. Gather my faithful ones who have made a covenant with me and sacrifice them.
By sacrifice. Who made a covenant with me by sacrifice. Like, they made their covenant through sacrifice. Yeah. Not that don't sacrifice them. But there can be some comfort in thinking that God, at the end, is going to be the one who makes the judgment and not us. Because, frankly, human beings can suck at judgment. Right? Come on.
No, totally. When I'm mad that someone's judging me, I'd rather God does it. When I think God has not noticed the dumb things other people do, I would like some input.
That's 2 Corinthians. We're still hearing from Paul. What's next?
2 Corinthians is pretty good. Sort of, maybe.
Why do I have to come back to a hard week of preaching?
It is a dumb week. But it's Transfiguration. You can talk about fluffy clouds and how Jesus needed a vacation.
Oh. Transfiguration.
So this is the 2 Corinthians is the reading that's supposed to explain to us why Jesus wants everything to be kept a secret until later, and so some people knew and some people didn't. If I didn't have to look at the mark on this, I would also crumple this up and throw it behind myself, because this is the place where all of those theologians who were super smart and helped us with the Reformation draw their ammunition to say dumb things about why babies die. Right? Yes, it is, because they talk about predestination, the fancy word about who gets to go to heaven and who gets to go to hell, and their idea, based on some of this Corinthian stuff, is that some people are shielded from ever understanding how amazing God is because God wants them to perish. It's not a Lutheran thing to say unless you're not an ELCA Lutheran. You might say that. I've seen it actually in the comments. If you haven't read Bishop Reinhardt's open letter to the LGBT Christians, and you want to read people who take 2 Corinthians really literally, that some people are veiled and will never understand the gospel, read some of the negative barky comments on the bottom of that.
Or don't, because you don't necessarily need to expose yourself to more negativity, especially if you've had plenty in your life. The great rule of internet is never read the comments, right? Unless you're on CakeRex. If you're on CakeRex, then you can read the comments, because they're almost as funny as the CakeRec post itself. But other than that, don't read the comments. That's my 2 cents.
Yep.
Yep.
Anyway.
You know, I have to say that in seminary, I took my history class over at the Presbyterian seminary, and we spent a lot.
They're nice.
We spent a lot of time talking about predestination, and I had never really understood the concept or the idea. And it was a wonderful way for me to know that I am not someone who is Presbyterian, because I do not believe in predestination. I don't. I believe in free will. And if there's predestination, I don't think that there can be free will. So it was a wonderful way, sometimes working with in ecumenical or even interfaith situations gives us the opportunity to be exposed to a concept we never would have thought of, we never would have dreamed of, and to be able to say, wow, that is so cool that you believe that way, and you really believe it, and it feeds you, and it brings you life, and it inspires you to awesome things, and that's awesome and cool, and I so don't believe it, and it's not where I stand, and I love that the creation of God is so diverse, and the body of Christ is so diverse, and that we are all needed in this world. And how awesome that I know more about who I am, and I can stand more firmly in my own belief and be able to articulate more clearly what I do believe, because I don't believe that.
Yeah. When I was an undergrad, we read the entire works of Calvin. It was very enlightening, and I think I might have thrown the book a couple times when he started talking about babies. But here's the thing, right? We can say, oh, I can't believe people believe in predestination. But you could also come up with a million things. Like, I often think, talking to people who identify as atheist or agnostic can have sometimes conversations that I agree with more than when I'm having conversations with people who are taking the Bible super duper 100% every single sentence literally, because a lot of the stuff they think is crap, I also think is crap, and don't believe in a God who would be up to the things that have put them away from religion. And I think we all, every single one of our faiths, every single one of our books of confessions or books of order or all of these things have things in them that we are trying to amend through time because we said dumb stuff in them, right? For example, I wish Paul would never have used the word slavery, because of the way slavery has had an effect on culture in the United States. It's not okay to make a metaphor about slavery and have that be something that is godly, right? In the same way that you can use the word Holocaust and it only means one thing, and you're probably not going to bring that word back and make it joyous. Maybe we're just not there yet. But every single faith has some sort of belief or something where we've missed the mark. We've either missed the mark because of culture, because of our humanness. You can call it because of our original sin. That's not a language that Lutherans are really into now, but Martin Luther was. And Martin Luther, there's a whole big long list of dumb things he said. The fact that his words were used in the Holocaust, even if he did not intend them that way, are something that we continue to repent for. The treatment of Native Americans, the treatments of Anabaptists, the treatment of Mennonites, the fact that he encouraged killing of peasants because he wanted the princes to be on his side and not to have himself be killed. These are all things that we wish didn't exist and that I would crumple up and throw behind me, and actually, funnily enough, are behind me. And I think they are things that we want to continually be reforming. There are some people who think all of those things, every single one of them, were right. And they would still defend them today because they're right. I don't think they're right. And the beauty of the Bible and the beauty of having lots of pastors and time and culture changing, not that time and culture changes God, but God uses time and culture to help us see things differently. Like if you have a kaleidoscope and you shift it to the side, it's the same stuff, but you see it from a different angle and you might feel it differently. We don't deserve to suffer, but on the other side of going through something tough, we might see the exact same world differently. God doesn't necessarily want us to have those bad things happen, but it's true that as we shift and as the world shifts, that we see the world differently, we see more bits of God, and that's just true. And so holding really fast to wanting to make sure that we read the Bible the same way as people who were roaming around in tents or getting slaughtered all the time might work for some people, but it doesn't work for me. And if there are parts of the Bible that don't work for you, as Lutherans, we believe that the grace of God comes to us through things beyond the Bible. And we believe that water can help us understand something. We believe that the Holy Spirit can transform us. We believe we can learn lessons from bread, that we can learn lessons from wine, that being in community changes us. And yes, the Bible is super duper important. Yes, Jesus' historical time on the planet are super duper important, though as we understand history differently, we might understand those historical actions differently. And so we never want to like throw out the baby with the bathwater. We don't crumple up our book of confessions and forget it ever existed, because there's some real gems in there. But we are learning, we're nowhere near being there, we're learning how to read critically, how to stay in community through disagreements, and how to continue to be held together by similar faith and similar traditions, even when we shift in different directions. So when the Lutherans in Texas are shifting this way and seeing something that needs to be learned, and the Minnesotans are shifting this way and learning something different, and the West Coast people are off in Mars shifting, that we can share back the stories of what we saw from our different perspectives and learn from each other, but also hopefully grow together in those things that teach us maybe lessons that are more bigger than our location. But Lutherans aren't very good at saying exactly what the more bigger is, right? Because our mission statements, if you've ever read them, are kind of wishy-washy. God loves you because everyone's a sinner and everyone's a saint. So you're great, and we don't got it all right yet. And each, we're working on it. We're works in progress that invented reforming, not really, but made reforming our big code word, and then got grumpy when everyone tried to keep doing it through history. Anyway, what do you think, Amanda?
Well, I think that one of the things that when I came to faith in college that one of the things that I really liked about ELCA Lutheran, and I would not have necessarily known or been able to articulate a lot of this stuff at that point in time. But one of the things that really meant a lot to me personally, as someone coming from an atheist agnostic standpoint, who didn't believe every word of the Bible literally, because I could not see how you could say don't have mixed fiber clothing held, ignored, but hold other pieces of the scripture literally and abuse other people with it, because I didn't think that a God that I would want to be a part of or be created by would be that petty. Um, so, but what I really liked in learning for me was that ELCA Lutherans don't have an exclusivity belief that some other denominations do. And I think that's what allows us to be this wishy-washy, and say saint and sinner and we're trying to figure it out and those kinds of things, because we don't actually believe that if you don't believe like us, you're going to go to hell. And there are other denominations that really truly hold in their heart that if you do not accept and believe the way that they do, that you will not be saved, that you will not be, that God will not be able to hold on to you in the coming judgment. And so I think that because we don't believe that, because we believe God's grace is bigger than that, whether that's more liberal or progressive or whatever label you want to put on that, I really, I don't have a need to be able to contain that. But I think because there is not that exclusivity, that we're able to be wishy-washy, we're able to live in the gray, we're able to live within our disagreements across our very large denomination, because we do have that grace space and that forgiveness, that we aren't saying I have to be right and we have to be right. And as someone who didn't grow up in the church and who looked really kind of questioning on the church, that's what made my decision to be baptized in this theology, was that it didn't have that exclusivity. And I would grow to learn more about what Lutheran theology meant in depth, obviously, in the years to come. But in those first couple of months of catechesis, which is the fancy schmancy word for teaching about Christianity, that was the clincher for me, was it's not an exclusive faith. We don't think we have all the answers and that we know everything for everybody. So when we talk about predestination, or we talk about this veil, that not everybody is going to understand it and they're not going to get it, and some people do and some people don't, the ELCA Lutheran theology kind of allows for that and gives grace and space for that, in ways that I have appreciated throughout my lifetime. And it's part of what brought me to this denomination. I am a theological Lutheran, not a cultural Lutheran, right? I'm not Scandinavian, I'm not Norwegian, I didn't come through it through Minnesota roots. I come from Pennsylvania, but I'm not Pennsylvania German Lutheran. I don't come to it through the cultural side of Lutefiskefte and mac and cheese in the German, and kielbasa, but I come to it through the theology. So as a theological Lutheran, that's the kind of piece that really called to me from my place of being one of them there unchurched people.
Well, I'm going to tell you a story from the cultural Lutherans. I got my hoodie up for the story to remind me. If you don't know, there's a big thing going on where people are trying to make hoodies illegal because they're scary, and because someone was allowed to shoot someone because of their fear of them in a hoodie and not be tried for it. And so at my grandmother's congregation, St. Paul Lutheran in Clark, South Dakota, a pastor who previously had told very offensive jokes from the pulpit — he likes to tell jokes to start off his sermon — started a joke. And my grandma was a little nervous. She said, here's how the joke goes. Are you ready? So, St. Peter goes to Jesus in heaven and says, Jesus, I just wanted to let you know there's somebody at the gate in a hoodie, and I wanted to see what you wanted me to do. And Jesus goes, I really don't have time for this, Peter. I'm super busy. I trust you to handle it. So Peter goes away. A little while later, he comes back. He goes, so what'd you do? And kind of expecting maybe that Peter had sent him away, Jesus is kind of like questioning him, like, what'd you do? And he goes, oh, I just took the fence down. Right? So instead of making people wait outside the gate and judging them based on what they look like or what their attributes are, Peter tears down the fence at the gates of heaven so that everybody can get in without having to be judged. Yeah. A good joke from the
nice joke
from the previous. Maybe the
more like an anecdote.
Sort of an anecdote. I might not have told it in a funny way. It's possible.
Story. No, I don't know that there would be a funny way to tell that one, but it was good.
I'm not saying anybody laughs at the jokes he tells at the beginning of his sermons. I'm just saying they're called jokes.
There you go. So are we going to talk for a moment about this gospel?
Yeah, Mark. So
yay, Mark.
The hill of the Transfiguration, there's two that are in dispute depending upon which faith you come from. There's either the hill here or the hill there. They're right next to each other. They're about the same size. I can't tell why you'd wonder one from another. But in the afternoon, that's where the clouds go. So every time I drove past that hill, it's just on the other side of Magdala, where Mary Magdala was from. There was a lot of clouds up there. Maybe I'll post a little picture. I took a picture of the Hill of Transfiguration. It was neat because it was raining and cloudy that day. I don't know. It's hard to tell what Jesus is up to, but remember that we have fast-forwarded in the Gospel of Mark 9 chapters. And so the last couple of weeks we were in chapter 1, and remember when that baptism happened and the heavens were torn into two and God says, this is the one with whom I'm well pleased. So if you've read the book starting with chapter 1 and you're now on chapter 9, even though they're short chapters, you might have forgotten that that happened. And so this story might be repeated in order for you to remember that God announced in a booming voice that Jesus is the one. Also, as I mentioned previously, this is a moment where if you are one of the people who thought that when the Messiah returned that Elijah had to come first, then this checks that off the list. So this is an interesting thing. And you get Moses there also thinking Jesus is pretty neat. This story reminds me of Pentecost. Because in Pentecost, there's this earth-shattering moment. Not that the disciples have 12 tongues each where they can speak every language of the world, right? Not just because they're simultaneously translated before there's the technology to simultaneously translate people, but because it says the entire world. A sentence was said that everyone in the world agreed was from God. Never ever again will anyone ever agree on one sentence that everyone's like, that's from God. Ever, right? And it would have been super helpful if the people writing the Pentecost story would have written down that sentence. Don't you think that would have been the most important part of the damn story? But no, they didn't. In part probably because as soon as you write the sentence down, not everybody agrees with it anymore because they want an Oxford comma or not, or they want the word of instead of for. The biggest division between the Catholics and the Lutherans is the interpretation of the word the in communion and whether or not the bread is real flesh or mystical flesh. Because of the word the, right? So as soon as you write down the word that the sentence everyone agreed on, we'd all start arguing about it. Same thing is true with this text. Transfiguration happens. Moses and Elijah and Jesus are all hanging out. It's the perfect a rabbi, a priest, and a prophet walked into a bar joke. Right? And the part of the story that we have is the fact that Peter wanted to build them a tent, which I can only imagine in a pothead voice because that's what I think of Peter, right? And so I imagine it like, dude, let's build some tents. There's some guys here, right? Hold on one sec. I'm on Bible study. So this is what I'm imagining, and I'm also imagining, why did we write down that Peter wanted to build them tents and not write down what the heck they talked about? Right? Unless they were more in tune with what was going on for the Buddhists at the time and they meditated, right? Or maybe they sang a song, but if they did, what song did they sing? Like, if you get the coolest guys of faith all in the same room, wouldn't you write down what they said?
Or
Thank
would you
goodness
just
that
want to
they
be
did.
there? Or you
Yeah.
just want to stay? Just
Yeah.
like, I mean, sometimes when you meet people that you really, really deeply admire and you really care about, you don't know what to say and you don't really remember the things after the thing, but you know that you really wanted to just stay there for a long, long time and you were told you couldn't.
Absolutely.
And Jesus says,
Absolutely.
no, you can't do that. This isn't something you can contain.
Yeah, and it ends with this like, and then they left wondering, what does rising from the dead mean? Really? Why didn't you wonder how'd those dead guys get here? On top of a mountain. Why can't I tell anyone about it? No? What does rising from the dead mean? Mm, I wonder.
I
So,
wonder.
Mark's gospel is one that is trying to tell you that Jesus was up to something awesome, that the characters in the story don't understand it, that you are smarter than the characters of the story, and you need to share this story with others. And so if you read all the way through to the end, to chapter 16, then you'd know it's your job to continue telling the story, and you'd know all the pertinent details. And you wouldn't have to wonder what rising from the dead means, because you'd be like, ugh. So if you are left feeling like you are smarter than Peter,
Score.
that's Mark's job here in this text. Yeah. So
Yep.
that's what I
It's a
think about Mark.
it's a fascinating. I mean, Transfiguration is just an interesting conversation to have, and it's one of those events in the scripture that we have to, at least it's not a theological concept like Trinity Sunday or something,
Right.
or Christ the King, but we're headed into, I mean, this is really setting us up. What this is setting us up for folks who aren't familiar with the liturgical calendar, is that next Wednesday is Ash Wednesday, and we begin Lent, which is this journey to the cross. And so this is kind of wrapping up this time in this section of Jesus was born. We were waiting for Jesus in Advent, and we talked a lot about the coming of the end of the world. And then we get Christmas, and we get who is Jesus and him as a baby, and the stories about fleeing Egypt, and the situation around his early years and the slaughter of the innocents, and all kinds of different stories about what happened in the life around in the early years. And then you get this time where we go back to hearing about the beginning of Jesus's ministry and his baptism and calling people and miracles and signs. And then we have this like big sign, like, no, really, 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 this is somebody to pay attention to. Transfiguration, equate
Right.
with big character figures. Whoop, 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 pay attention, pay attention. Okay, next week, let's send him to the desert. And then we take this plodding step. Mark, the Gospel of Mark, everything is immediate, 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 fly, 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 and then we get to the way that Doctor, our my help me, Bob, Doctor, New Testament professor. Why can't I
Oh
think of
yeah,
his name?
yeah. Robert
Smith.
Smith.
So Dr. Smith, the way he taught it, he was like, you zip through and you go fast, 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 fast until you get into the shadow of the cross, and then Mark like slams on the brakes, and then you like walk the shadow of the cross until you get to the foot of the cross.
Yeah.
And that's where the gospel ends, right? So it's this screaming fast, and then we stop and we slow down, and we get into Lent and we stop and we slow down and start to take that journey to the cross. And so that begins next week with Ash Wednesday. So next week, if you are around a place and you see people with like smudgy smudges on their foreheads, that's what it's about. We're starting this time of the year where we try to remember our own mortality, and we try to remember things, like we try to participate in acts that are going to help us to feel close to God and kind of be aware of God's presence. We take 40 days to be really intentional about trying to remember God in daily life. And some people do that by giving something up for Lent. Some people do that by taking something on for Lent. Some people do that through what's called almsgiving, which is like intentional giving away of things.
Mm-hmm.
Some people do that through like daily prayer and meditation or fasting. Um, but all of it is a way to kind of remind us of God's presence in our life on a regular basis. And so we tithe. A tithe is 10%. So we tithe 10% of the year, um, 36 and a half days. So Sundays are off in Lent. They're mini celebrations, but we take those 40 days plus the Sundays and we tithe our year to really taking some intentional thought about this really awesome person that we're seeing transfigured on the mountain this week, and how that breaking into the world of Jesus changes our world and changes and influences our life. So we are heading into the season of Lent next week, and that's what this is also kind of setting us up for.
And next week we'll be posting our first flash worship service, which will be a service that you can use if you want to give out ashes publicly on the streets. If you live in an urban space where there's a place where there's lots of people, or if there's like a communal place in town where you just want to be publicly giving away ashes, how you can do that without having to write your own liturgy for it.
And if you would like to join me at Holiday Park by the Lloyd Center on Ash Wednesday, we will be giving out ashes in Holiday Park at noon. It's the same park that I walk on Fridays with Connected, and you are more than welcome to come by and see me there and get some ashes and a prayer. And yeah.
I'll be at the Civic Center BART station in San Francisco.
Brilliant.
So.
And I know there's another one in Portland. I'm not exactly sure of location, but I know there's some others who are doing it too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Good stuff. Anything else you want to say? I got to find out who was knocking on my door, though. They might be gone already. I might have been rude. I'm not sure.
Nope. I think we're good. So thank you everybody for watching.
Sorry, person knocking on my door, if I was rude to you.
Have a fabulous week, everyone.
Be well.
Bye.